Hi, everybody. Welcome into another edition. This is Cross Functionality, the first of 4 brand new episodes as we get set today, episode 41. Thank you for joining us via Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast, and on the YouTube side of things, visually watching the show on the Softball Strength Academy YouTube page. Today, episode 41, we are talking about preparing yourself and getting ready, giving yourself a proper hitting warm up, developing that proper hitting warm up for you to have a better time in the batter's box and more success ultimately as well. So, Miss Friend, co-host, softball national champion at the University of Alabama, and current day renowned coach, Cassie Reilly-Boccia, we have a lot to talk about today, don't we?
We do. I'm excited. Yes.
The first thing we do have to talk about, I've had a chance to watch a lot of the college baseball and college softball tournaments going on right now. And I stumbled upon the stat the other day of six, and I just looked at it from a baseball and softball perspective, that 6.7% of high school athletes, you were one of them at one point, 6.7% of high school athletes go on to play college sports, Division 1, 2, and 3. And I'm watching these phenomenal athletes at the Division 1 level, college baseball, college softball, how good they really are. And it should be a wake-up call for all the young people out there, ages 11 to 15. If you're entering high school, 11 to 14, that percentage has to be a wake-up call for you, and you have to understand, and you understand it perfectly, the competition it takes and how good those players are. There's so little space that you have at that level, as you've experienced, and now we're watching it, to fail. It's so small. The room for error is so small, and that percentage works even further against you as well. So that's a wake up call, in my opinion, to all of those young athletes out there. If you do indeed want to play at the next level, it's all that dedication.
Yeah. I mean, what a amazing opportunity it is too to watch. You and I both played at the next level, and we got to a point where we really weren't able to watch a ton unless it was the World Series, right? That was really the biggest
Yeah.
thing that was televised. And now you have games all the way from February until June for both women and men that are being televised nonstop. I think it's $15 a month for the ESPN app, if that. It might be a little bit less. And for the 3 or 4 months, that's worth your lunch money to save. That's worth your allowance to just be able to have access to watching all these different games and all these different teams. And you had just mentioned, like, you had watched a team and they do the little things right. Go and watch a team, watch how they warm up, watch how, they make an error during warm-ups and what they do to recover from it. And it's so valuable to see those things and get yourself in the mindset of, okay, I'm capable of this, but these are the steps that I need to take now to get to that level.
Well, and you mentioned, we were talking off air prior to the recording about the Tampa Bay Rays. That was a team that we were alluding to, that they do everything correctly. Watching, and of course, watching, your team, Coach Pat Murphy, our friend, your former coach, and what he would preach to his players, what he's talked about as a guest co-host on this podcast, year in, year out, that guy has coached teams to go deep into the postseason, go deep into these tournaments. And there are other programs out there like that as well, that follow that blueprint. Oklahoma, for example, talking about softball here. Stanford, they've had a really good last few years. College baseball, I mean, any SEC team. And then you look at the major league level. The Tampa Bay Rays, for example, that's the team that we were talking about, do everything correctly, from the high end type things, from pitch sequencing to being able to change your pitch design on the fly, to doing just the simple things correctly, like being able to play catch. I do want to, and the reason I'm looking at my phone here, because you brought up, and I want to give you some accolades right now. I have to do it, both privately and publicly. I want to get his name right here. Joe La Sorsa, right? Did I say it
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
He just got called up for Tampa Bay. He's getting a chance now to work with Kyle Snyder, who arguably is the best pitching coach right now going in the world, because of all the accolades and his ability to communicate players, both old school and new school methods. But Joe, bigger story, works at your academy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He's been
Congratulations.
with us, gosh, since he was in high school. He got drafted. Well, he was at our building. I just remember a group of guys at the table. And he's worked his butt off I mean, being a minor leaguer through COVID was so hard to watch for some of these guys. There was teams that were being wiped off. They were kind of held in this awful purgatory of not knowing what to do, where to go. And he stuck with it. He stuck with the Rays. He got a chance to play for the World Baseball Classic with Team Italy this past year, made a name for himself there, and then has really moved fast through the AAA right now and got called up last weekend. Had a great outing and is, from what I was watching right before we started, he had 2 scoreless innings heading into the 6th. So super proud of him. Very, very cool to watch.
Yeah, it is very cool. So congratulations to you. Congratulations to Joe. Talking today, episode 41. Subscribe to the podcast. Leave a review as well. Apple, Google, Spotify, and on YouTube, the Softball Strength Academy YouTube page. For further clips and a visual element of our show. Thank you very much for doing that. We do appreciate it. And email us your questions to jimbopodcast21@gmail.com. Talking today, structuring a hitting warm-up. It seems so simple. I think I've talked to you about this before on this show, probably in private too, how I used to warm up before in the on-deck circle. And we're obviously going to get further into the structuring a hitting warm-up, but my warm-ups a lot of times were used just to almost like waste time. And I'm not proud to say this, but I did it wrong for all those years. I used to fling the bat over my head, kind of like a helicopter, like helicopter
All the pros
wings.
are doing it.
All the pros were doing it at the time, and I thought I'd be Jimmy Cool back in the early to mid 2000s. And I didn't understand how to warm up as a hitter. I didn't understand how to warm up in the batting cage, how to warm up in the offseason, how to warm up before a game. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, structuring a hitting warm up. But hitting goes far beyond just being in the on deck circle, timing up the pitcher, although that is very important, arguably the most important thing. But it's also preparing your body for hitting, preparing your body for the types of movements that a high level hitter is going to do so that you don't hurt yourself. You don't hurt your obliques. You don't hurt your hamstrings. Getting your body properly warmed up and prepped for that day's hitting. Major leaguers do it, and it's an arduous process, but you have to do it if you want to be successful.
Yeah, and I think it's so funny because I always used to joke, we would have this long warm-up process for our arm, right? Like you start, the ideas around throwing have changed a lot, but when I was younger, it was, you start on a knee and then you get a little further on a knee and then you stand up and you throw with no step. And there's this whole sequence that just about, I mean, every coach would agree on, like, yeah, you got to take your time, warm up the arm. God forbid you hurt your arm. And, I feel like most people take a bat, they swing it a couple times, arch their back, bend over, touch their toes. They're like, all right, I'm good. Let's go get some front toss. So just, there is an art to warming up. And there's no right answer. There's gonna be some people who need longer warm-ups. There's some people who are, would mentally burn out if they're going to be warming up for a really long period of time. But it's just trying to find that happy medium as what checks the boxes for the athlete mentally, physically, and just starts to get their mind right and their body right to be able to hit.
So we're going to talk today about just creating an overall hitting warm-up, or maybe just a template, something that's very flexible, something that somebody can use as a blueprint and then fill it in, make it interchangeable as they see fit. But when it comes to a game, what do you think the best route to go when it comes to creating a hitting warm-up for a game? Not so much practice, but more so, by the way, practice. I saw that new commercial with Kevin Hart and Allen Iverson talking about him. I still remember that to this day. Anyway, when it comes to a game, warming up properly, what would be your best advice?
So I think it depends. My most recent experience with softball was at the collegiate level, right? And we were thankfully able to know who we were facing, at least one of 2 or 3 pitchers that we knew we were going to face. So we got to be very specific and intentional with, hey, we're facing a rise ball pitcher. We're going to practice the high pitch. We're going to practice staying on plane. We're going to practice seeing it down. Like, all these things. A lot of girls and a lot of guys that are playing high school and travel ball, you have no idea who you're facing, right? So it's almost like you have this like decision-making tree, right? It's like, do you know who you're about to face? Yes or no? Then, okay, so if you don't know who you're going to face, how do you warm up then? I think typically what people don't always get, and maybe what is forgotten, is that you take very little high intent reps in a game. Even if you have 4 at bats and you see maybe 5 pitches, how many of those are you actually swinging at? And so when you think of it, like in a game, you might be taking like as a max, like 10 swings. Like that just seems like a lot that you would actually take in the game. you can afford yourself then a lot of reps pre game so that you can still get yourself to that point. If we don't really take that many repetitions, you're thinking, okay, I'm not going to actually have my at bat for maybe another 45 minutes, and then it might be another hour after, however that the game may go. So I think at that point, when it comes to game time, once you get your generalized warm up in, once you take care of any precursors to injury, you take care of, hey, okay, my body is where it needs to be. You should probably have a list of 2 to 3 drills that just get your swing where it needs to be. For some of my girls, it's them hitting off of a low tee because they typically come too far forward, and they know hitting a low tee just helps them stay right. It's for some of them, for me, it was the inside outside pitch because that just kept me centered. If I could hit inside tee, then outside tee, I'm like, all right, my swing's in the right spot. So you don't need 50 drills before a game. You probably just need your couple that you keep in your back pocket so that okay, this is how I get my swing right. And then starting to see some live opportunities or front toss opportunities so that, you're not just hitting a stationary ball right before a game.
You mentioned in there, you get 4 or 5 pitches per plate appearance, but when you play at higher levels, at the Division I, the highest level of college softball, Division I baseball, professional baseball, you get maybe 2 pitches to hit, maybe 2 pitches that you could actually do damage with, 2 pitches that you can actually drive. Outside of that, you may get a pitch and a half, depending on how good that ace you may be facing on the mound is. But when you add it all together and you put the numbers together, say 4 at bats, we'll err on the safe side here, and we'll say 2 pitches per plate appearance that you may get to drive.
Sure.
You've got 2 pitches to do damage with. So 4 at bats, 8 pitches per game. So you're preparing your structured warm up prior to a game has to involve the mindset of, I've got 8 pitches today that I can do damage with. Say we're just facing a middle of the road type pitcher, you're not facing, I don't know, Jacob deGrom on the mound, right? You're facing a good pitcher at the softball Division I level, baseball Division I, professional baseball. I've got 8 pitches that I can actually do damage with.
Mm-hmm.
You got to now work around that blueprint, that statistic, and create a warm-up that gets you prepared for facing those 8 pitches that you can do damage with. And you mentioned it in there. You don't need to do 50,000 drills. You have to do the right drills, the right things that get you prepared physically and mentally.
Well, right. And so when you think of it, when you're having to get yourself so precise for those 8 pitches, how much is this actually physical? How much are you actually physically going to do before the game that is going to make that big of a difference? What you've done physically in the weeks and months leading up to the game is what's going to matter. And then how you get your mind right in order to allow all that physical preparation to come out during the game. That is the most important piece. So when we've talked in previous episodes about journaling, about the pre-at-bat routine, about the hourglass of focus, all of those things, so many times us as coaches, we're like, reps, we got to get our reps in. What about our mental reps? What about our preparation to allow our best swing to actually come to fruition while we're at the plate, when the spotlight's on, when there is so little room for that failure to happen or error to happen? Because pitching only gets better. Pitching just gets not even year after year, just level after level. I mean, these girls are so impressive in the circle, and these guys are so impressive on the mound. And as hitters, we're already at a disadvantage. It's just it is hard, and so that preparation means everything.
Yeah, when you talk about more so preparation, I have to ask, what did you do to prepare at the plate when you got to higher levels and prepared yourself for game action?
You know what? I think I used to talk about how confidence blinds logic, and you get to a point where your self-talk you've worked so hard to keep your self-talk at a premium, right? You're not allowing doubt to come in. You're not allowing yourself to be down on yourself. You've journaled, you've watched all this video, you've done all this preparation. Your confidence is just fueled. You're surrounded by your teammates. You're at that level. And again, you've worked on this all season, that you get to the point where you're like, she can't get me out. And I know it seems like, when you look at when I went back and watched film, and I'm like, these guys were so much better than us sometimes. But at the time, we had just prepared so much, and we had trained our minds so much that you get to this point of unwavering belief in yourself as an athlete and in your teammates. And that it's going to be, you could be really, really talented without that at that level. I think it's going to be very hard for your talent to come to fruition. You could be the most talented person on the field, but if you don't think you are, it's not going to come out, or it's going to be very inconsistent coming out. So I think, I think of that long-term preparation weighing heavier than the short term. But I guess just staying as consistent as possible, staying as consistent with your journaling. Or for me, I journaled before games, I visualized before games. I had a certain swing thought. I had a certain routine that I do before my at bat. And it's very hard sometimes to stick with that when the pressure starts to get mounted or when you get to those next levels. For whatever reason, we find ourselves deviating. Like we have to do something different all of a sudden because we're at this next level. It's like, no, this works for me. And this has always worked for me. And this is where you have to stay. You don't have to do anything super different to be successful at the next, just because it's a big game.
How much does your hitting warm-up, this warm-up that you've structured, if you ever got into a slump, how much of it actually changes? Goes to knowing what your personal needs are at this point. Goes to knowing, okay, this is where I am as a hitter. This is where I need to get to. Right now, I'm 0 for my last 10, or I'm 5 for my last 12. So I'm really on a good streak here. There's the hot and cold aspect of baseball and softball that not a lot of people like to talk about very often. So how does your structured warm up, how much does that deviate when you're going hot or you're not hitting all that well at that point?
Yeah. It's, it's such a lonely feeling when you're in a slump because a part of you wants to try everything. And you have so many people trying to help you, right? Like you could have done something when you were 5 for 12 and then you're continuing to do it when you're 0 for 12, but yet people are like, hey, you're taking your hand off the bat. Maybe try swinging with 2 hands on the bat, or like all these little things. And so you're so tempted to get into that quicksand of trying every little thing. I think it's just going through that decision-making tree. And so in my warm-up, I'm like, okay, am I swinging at pitches I want to hit? And if the question was no, all I did was work on my front foot because I knew if my decision-making was off, that meant something was off with my load. And so my reps that I was taking in my warm-up weren't off of a tee. It was maybe like, while my pitcher was warming up, I was standing off to the side, practicing when I would load, or it's watching film, practicing when I'd load. And if I had said, no, my pitch selection is good, then I'd ask, okay, well, how's my timing? Well, it's really early on an outside pitch. It's really late on an inside pitch. That was always my red flag. Hey, you're drifting too far in your swing. These are your drills you need to do. So again, it's this, and I'm reflecting so much of the last little bit of my senior year, which is unfair because that wasn't my entire career. That was just what I had built to get to. And I had people help me get to that point where you start to learn your tendencies, whether your pitch selection's off, your timing is off, and what boxes you need to check to get that in. And then all of a sudden slumps don't become so intimidating because at that point you're like, listen, I've been in them. I've come out of them. It takes one swing. It takes one at bat to just start feeling like it's going to happen next, Yeah.
Well, more great tips, by the way, on Cassie's social media, on her Instagram at Coach_CassieRB on Instagram, at Coach CassieRB on Twitter. Follow me as well at Jim Tara on both Twitter and Instagram. When it comes to off-season swings, I don't know how much you read the book. I apologize if I'm misspeaking here, how much you read Ted Williams' book. But
no, I did a couple of times. It's good.
A couple of times, I assume so. And he talked about how he used to hit until his hands would bleed. And it goes against my rule. I don't really often, when it comes to hitting, go against Ted Williams or his theories. But if there's one thing I sort of raise a red flag at, it's when your hands would bleed, hitting until your hands bleed. Point being, you're taking so many swings and it's becoming quantity over quality, right? So I'm all for in the off season and in season too, but in the off season, and Albert Pujols has discussed this, taking quality swings over quantity, the amount of swings. 5 good swings is better, for example, than 10 bad swings. But you also need to warm up too when it comes to off season hitting. You can't just jump into the cage and start hitting live pitching. What would be, and this is like the word of the show here, what would be the blueprint for you for off-season type warm-ups to get ready for hitting and work on specific things that you need to work on at that point in your off-season progression hitting plan?
Sure. So typically with the off-season, and I can, this is me from experience. This is from what I've worked with athletes with since 2009. And so first I'm looking at the human being first, meaning do we have any glaring red flags, right? Is there anything like something as simple as forward head posture, like an athlete whose like neck juts a little further forward typically has tight front side of their neck, so their sternocleidomastoid is a little bit tight, and that's going to affect the way they potentially view the ball. So their generalized human being warm up might just be to like keep, certain exercises that might work on that, and that's just a small example. I'm then looking at them athletically as a whole. We have very skilled athletes in the sport of baseball, softball, but not always very athletic athletes. And sometimes something as simple as adding sprints and skips and crawls and jumps to our warm up actually start to warm up that central nervous system, preparing the body to exude power. I'm then looking at when I say, so I go human athlete, and then I go sport, and the sport is really just what's the seasonality. Typical seasonality, I get an off season, but not always, because we have girls and guys playing tournaments in December and January all throughout the winter. So I have to kind of structure what is needed for them based on where they're at in their season. And then finally, I can go position, meaning how specific of something do I need? I have some hitters who are very quad dominant. They're a catcher, their hip flexor takes over. Their very specific warm up is going to be getting them into their hinge a little bit more. It's not because they won't push out of their leg. So you can really go down a rabbit hole and a wormhole. And if you're a parent or a coach listening to this saying like, wait a second, I can't go that detailed. It's really just it's just giving you a lens to look at your athlete through. And that's it. It's saying, if you have an entire team of athletes, you could probably bucket them and say, okay, these 3 athletes really need to get warm and hot to hit well. If they're not warmed up, it just takes them 15 swings to get a good swing in. So they're going to have a little bit of a more athletic based warm up. And then you have these bucket of athletes that, they really have a hard time sinking into their legs. So they might be doing a ton of load and pauses and commitment holds and extension holds just to feel their legs, so on and so forth, right? So you can kind of bucket different warm-up structures to make it individualized without, going too crazy with having 15, 16 different warm-ups going on at the same time. So that is how I've structured that. As far as reps and sets goes, again, that's knowing the athletes, that's getting really comfortable with adjusting on the fly, and then also teaching your athletes. I have said sometimes to my athletes, hey, I want 5 high quality swings. It might take you 15 reps to get 5 high quality swings in, meaning they might take a swing and be like, you know what, that wasn't it. They reset, they go back to the drawing board. It's 5 high quality swings. And then you have, the idea is that hopefully you get to the point where you can go 5 for 5 on your high quality swing, or your high quality rep, I should say. So that is a way to potentially structure kind of putting the ball in the athlete's court. Not to word vomit all of that out.
No. But what if you're a parent and you don't have the knowledge of Cassie and Jim? Let's say you're a parent, you want to take little Jimmy or little Cassie to the batting cage in the off season, right? Or you live in a warm weather climate, so you can take the little kid to the batting cage in February, right? Right before your season hasn't started yet. And you don't how would a parent warm up? Because they don't know, they haven't put that athlete in that bucket that you're talking about. I mean, this is high level stuff that you're talking about and that we're educating people on. But how would a parent go about, okay, let's get in the cage, let's warm up? What would they instruct their kid to do to get ready to swing?
Sure. So I'd say first thing, let's get the athletes at least close to sweating, right? So something as simple, I love using time because this is how many quality reps we can get in a certain period of time, right? So maybe it's 20 seconds you're setting a clock up with, and you say, okay, listen, we're gonna shuffle from line to line. And people might be like, well, there's no shuffling and hitting. What are you doing? The idea of pushing off of one leg laterally and landing on one leg laterally, that is very much so that weight shift is going to translate to their ability to swing, right? So you have something as simple as shuffling side to side. You can then say, okay, next thing we're going to do bear crawls. And you have 10 yards. That's it. You don't need a huge space. We're going to do bear crawls forward and backwards. And again, people are going to look and be like, what are we doing crawling around? That is going to be, you're warming up your entire core complex. You're warming up your central nervous system. So, I mean, that's just an example of 2 exercises: shuffling side to side, forward, backward, bear crawl. You do that for 20 seconds, and that might take you about 3 to 4 minutes to just get hot. And you've checked a lot of boxes so far. Now, as far as if you're like, listen, I have the tiniest little space, my kid's not into that stuff. I love doing positional holds with the swing. For instance, Okay, we're going to be nice and relaxed. We're holding our stance for 5 to 10 seconds. No big deal. Stance is not that big of a deal. You have some rhythm. Now you're going to launch. We're holding. Again, that shouldn't be that big of a deal. But as a parent, you can just be like, okay, we're going to count down from 10. Now here's where it starts to get interesting. I'm going to have you hold contact. And at a proper contact position, their back leg essentially looks like it's in a lunge, right? And that should be taxing. And they should have their head down. Pull up a picture of Mike Trout eye contact, whatever it may be,
Yeah.
and be like, all right, listen, I want you to try to do this here. Head is down, holding this position. And they're going to be like, oh man, I'm kind of shaking a little bit. The last thing is, hey, you're going to go ahead and hold, extension hold. Same thing. You're now in this position. The athlete's sweating. They're using very specific musculature that's needed for the swing. And they're starting to get warmed up. Dry swings are also important. You don't want to just warm up slowly. They're about to do something very violently. So that is a completely different energy system and muscle group that we're going to now tax. So something where, okay, we did our slow swings. Maybe we'll take a couple swings with our eyes closed to get some proprioceptive work in. And then it's like, okay, I want you to pretend this ball is coming in. I want you to load and swing. And you take 10 hard swings, no ball, just 10 hard swings in the cage. And now you're getting them to the point where it's like, okay, we're close. We're getting to the point where they're sweating, their body's warmed up. And then if you have the luxury to adjust the speed, I always think it's important to control your swing off slower pitching before you ramp up the fast. I know we're very tempted to go into the cross skull, cage. It's like very fast, dangerous.
Yeah.
But
Like
try
going
to
on the
warm
Black Diamond ski
Yeah,
slope before you actually learn how to
exactly.
ski.
If you can warm up slow and then advance is good. And then sometimes those automatic batting cage things too, you're enticed to hit every single one. I would encourage to do 3 to 5, take that step out, reset for a pitch or two, go back in. So that is, I guess, like a quick and dirty way to get someone hot, but I think it'd be very effective to take some of that stuff and bring it to the cage as a parent.
All right, so here we are now. We're talking today, episode 41, structuring a hitting warm up. This is like the main main point of today's show, and this is going to be information filled. What do you think is a proper? Let's give everybody a proper blueprint for structuring a hitting warm up. And it could vary. I know it's not easy. It's different for everybody.
It is, yeah. I like time over reps. Even if it's like, hey, we're going to take a minute to work on this particular thing. That takes a lot of pressure off of, if you have a group of people, of someone who is going to crush one drill or one exercise and someone who's going to have it a little bit more challenging. It's like, I just want you to work on this for the next 30 seconds. Good. Now we switch to the next thing. I really do think you try to get some blood flow going. So get them hot first, get them jumping, crawling, or sprinting, something along those lines that will help warm up their central nervous system. Get them doing something specific with the swing, starting slow first and then moving to fast. And then once they are fast, they've warmed up their swing speed. You start with, I'm going to say slower pitching, but easier, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? Stimulus. So you want an easier stimulus first, ramping up to a harder stimulus. So if you have the luxury of going tee to soft toss to front toss to, maybe machine or live, that it would be a proper progression instead of just going right to live or right to batting cage or pitching machine.
So right. you listed off some key points there of a blueprint for hitting that
Correct.
makes things very interchangeable too. Because right. I think a lot of it, from everything that I've gathered today, a lot of creating and structuring a hitting warm-up has to do with having some key pillars, but you know what? It also has to be very flexible. And you have to be able to manage what you may need to change with this thing or this here, because not everything can always be the same constantly, because that's probably too where you run into some problems.
Yeah, I mean, there is some value in having consistency in the warm-up, maybe one or two things, or the length of it, or something that's consistent. And the reason it's consistent is because all of a sudden that starts to get the hitter in this habit of like, cool, I go through this warm-up, my body gets prepped, my mind gets prepped, I'm ready to hit, I'm ready to hit. So there is some value in having some type of routine or structure to the warm-up that is consistent day to day, but you don't want to necessarily be doing the exact same thing day to day. The other thing too is if you are about to prep for a really long hitting practice where you know they're going to have a bat in their hand just about the entire time, I would encourage to mix things up a little bit. Throw med balls, throw basketballs, do things that are obtuse to actually having a bat in your hand. And then that just is it's having your brain create the same movement patterns, but with a different stimulus. And that is helpful for grooving that pattern and reinforcing those patterns to be effective for us when it comes time for us to actually hit when it matters.
So do we hit on everything today when it comes to structuring and hitting
So
warm-up?
shoot, I know I put a lot in the notes. I had a lot going through my mind. I
Yeah.
think we're good.
Giving everybody a peek behind the curtain today.
Yes.
behind our prep. Structuring and hitting warm-up. This is a great topic, episode 41, right in your wheelhouse when it comes to hitting. And you always put great videos on your Instagram. So again, follow Cassie at @coach_CassieRB on Instagram, myself at Jim Tara, both Twitter and Instagram, at Coach CassieRB on Twitter as well. If you want to be a sponsor of the show, email us, reach out, JimboPodcast21 at gmail.com. Reach out to us for that. Any questions that you may have, feel free to reach out as well. JimboPodcast21 at gmail.com. And on YouTube, leave your comments. Cassie likes when you leave comments on the Softball Strength Academy YouTube page.
Or
do you have anything coming
Instagram,
up?
anything.
Or on
No,
Instagram.
only thing coming up is watching softball and baseball's in regionals right now. I would encourage everybody to turn the television on, turn your app on, watch these guys play. Of course you can watch Major League Baseball too, but there's something a little different about watching it at the college level. You can feel that connection a little bit more to these athletes and to their prep and to what they're doing. And there's certainly a lot more passion involved when you know that these guys are potentially playing for their last time. So I would encourage everybody to watch. Softball has by the time this comes out on Wednesday, the finals will be happening tonight.
Right. I'm thinking in my head. 3, 4, 5, 6. This comes out on Wednesday the 7th.
There you go. So that'll be the night of the finals. So you'll have about 2 to 3 softball games left to watch and at least a couple more weeks of baseball. So I encourage you to watch.
Well, you know what else I want to ask you before we get going here, before we end the show. Do you have any advice for athletes who are going through that death, the athlete death, we call it? Their careers are ending. They're not going professionally, baseball or softball. You've been there. I've been there. What is your advice for athletes that have reached that point?
Yeah. To show up to it as much as humanly possible. And as hard as it is, and as much as it's going to hurt, you're essentially showing up. This is going to sound so morbid. You're mourning who you were. And it's like going to a funeral and trying to be like, all right, I'm just going to not really pay attention, not really going to look, not really feel. And then you move on. That the death of that person you didn't actually deal with is going to hit you at some point later on. And it's the same thing for us personally. If we're going through this massive transition in our life and we try to just avoid what we're actually feeling and avoid the process of transitioning into, a new phase of our life, that might hit us somewhere else down the road. So it's feel it, go through it, embrace what you had and how great it was and how much better the next chapters of your life can be. But yeah, definitely show up to how it feels.
And one more point, if I may, for those athletes whose athletic careers are ending and they're mourning that death, probably what you'd say, 21, 22 years old, right
around there. Yep.
Yeah. You guys have your whole life in front of you.
Yep.
Cassie and I are a little bit older. We still have our whole lives in front of you, in front of us. So just keep that in mind too. It might make things a little bit easier. All right. Thank you for listening and watching, everybody. Be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and we'll talk to you next week. Take care.